Good morning and welcome to Nevada Hotel and Lodgings Association's webinar titled Impressive Resumes, Assertive Applications, and Successful Interviews. My name is Anthony Lai, and I am with the International School of Hospitality, along with being an active member of Nevada Hotel and Lodging Association. I'll be moderating today's discussion. Today, we're going to learn from leading professionals at MGM Resorts International who will provide guidance, recommendations, and best practices for those seeking employment in the hospitality industry. During this webinar, you will learn the following: what should be included in your resume that will help you stand out from the competition, how to fill out a job application effectively so that you will get noticed, and tips for a successful in-person or virtual interview. I would like to introduce Andy Meese, the Vice President of Hospitality for Mandalay Bay, Delano, and Luxor, to kick off the session. Hi, Andy.
Hey, Anthony. And good morning, everybody. Welcome back to another session sponsored by, obviously, the Nevada Hotel and Lodging Association. Again, my name is Andy Meese. I'm the Vice President of Hospitality for Mandalay Bay, Delano, and the Luxor. And excited to be here this morning as well. I believe this is either the fourth or fifth session that we provided. So I probably have an opportunity to know most of you, but I've been with MGM Resorts for a little over 21 years now and have been a member in the Nevada Hotel and Lodging Association for many, many years, and also serve on the board and executive committee. So thank you for joining today. I think this is a very timely session. I know we talked about it, I believe, last time, but obviously we're pre-Memorial Day weekend, getting ready for an extremely busy weekend. And this summer is absolutely heating up. Obviously, restrictions are changing on June 1st, and we're really getting back to normal. The only thing that we're not normal on right now is probably having enough team members to take care of our guests. So that's absolutely a priority right now for the entire community. So again, this is a very timely session. So all of you that are looking for opportunities, whether it's new jobs or transferring or what have you, you're going to hear from some great leaders this morning. And I will briefly introduce them and turn it over to them to just talk about their career a little bit. But I'm going to introduce Austin Raymond, is Director of Hotel Operations for Mandalay Bay and Delano. Brittany Morocco, Director of Guest Experience for Mandalay Bay, Delano, and the Luxor. And then also we got Randy Goldberg joining us from our corporate team, who's the Vice President of Talent Acquisition Strategy, and probably involving this topic has probably the most critical job right now for our company. And obviously he's very busy. So appreciate all of your guys' time. Maybe I'll turn it over to Austin first, then Brittany, and then Randy, just to introduce yourselves as well. And then we'll turn it back after that to Anthony to start the panel. Thank you.
Thanks, Andy. Yeah, good morning, everyone. My name is Austin Raymond, Director of Hotel Ops for Mandalay Bay and Delano. Been with MGM Resorts for, I think, 12 years now. Andy actually hired me into the company at New York. That's way throwback. But working my way up, I've been at New York. I've been at Vdara over in City Center. Most recently, MGM Grand. And then now I've been at Mandalay Bay for about 3.5 years. So it's a little bit about my background. Originally, I'm from just outside Detroit, Michigan. So I moved out here about 14 years ago. So.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. I'm Brittany Morocco. I have worked for MGM Resorts as well for just over 12 years now. I've started with the company as an intern in the City Center project and have worked in a variety of roles in hotel operations and guest experience. I've gotten the pleasure to work at many of our MGM Resorts properties, including Vdara, Bellagio, MGM Grand, Mandalay Bay, and now Luxor as well. And then I'm a proud UNLV hospitality grad as well. So go Rebels.
Nice, nice. Hey, good morning, everybody. So I'm probably the youngest in terms of MGM tenure on the call. I've been with MGM for 3 years. Although I think I probably have you two beat in terms of total hospitality background. I worked for Hyatt for 27 years in operations roles, in general human resource roles, overseeing talent management for Hyatt hotels for about 10 years. And I've lived all across the country, right? California, Arizona, Texas, Atlanta, Chicago. I don't know if there's any Hyatt people out there, but they used to have this acronym. They say Hyatt stood for, this will sound terrible, have your ass there tomorrow, because you're constantly moving people all over the place. So thrilled to be on the call and thrilled to share some hints and tips with everybody.
Well, thank you, Randy. And thank you, panelists, for sharing a little bit about your background. We will now start off with answering the questions provided from our NHLA members. Again, if anyone in the live audience that has a question for the panel, please type it in the Q&A feature, and we'll get it answered towards the last 10 minutes of this session. So panelists, you ready for the questions? Wonderful. So the first set of questions we're going to pertain is going to be about resumes. You know, that's usually the first thing that comes to mind when we're applying for a job. We need to have that resume in handy. So first question will go to Austin. Austin, what is a glaring concern on a resume that could cause it to be disqualified from consideration?
Yeah, first and foremost, I think, Randy, I think we need an MGM acronym. So, but no, a lot of stuff, the glaring concerns, I mean, first and foremost, as soon as you open it up, I mean, typos and grammatical errors is huge. I think we see a lot of that when that comes through. I mean, really just need to reread that resume over and over again. You know, lack of like details and specifics. I think a lot of people are very vague in certain things when they're writing resumes. And really, when you're writing your resume, really gear it specifically towards the position you're going for. There's a lot of resumes going back to, like, if you want to call it like basic, it's the same one they're submitting each and every time. And you want to really gear it towards, if I'm going for a hotel operations manager, I'm going to, you know, really gear it towards my leadership skills, management skills, all that. And really, you know, really list accomplishments is a big one. A lot of people go on and really will just list the job duties. I mean, we understand what the job was when you were there, especially if we're in the same industry. Also really avoid long paragraphs. I'm all about reading short stories, but on a resume, not the best view. You know, and really no run-on sentences. A lot of times there's no periods. That's your friend if you just keep going. And then, you know, make sure, like, you know, formatting is good. Don't use different fonts. I see sometimes, like, you can tell people copy and pasted for this one's at 14, this one's at 10. You know, and there's a lot of stuff doesn't line up as well. Really be mindful of margins and all that. And, you know, don't do too much info. I think a lot of times too, when someone's describing a specific position, I mean, half the page was about that. I mean, we get it. You know, really just kind of just go through it. You know, be very specific, and really the biggest one is listen to those accomplishments and have a lot of bullet points. You know, and then, you know, the biggest thing too, I cannot stress, you know, just have several people read it. You know, direct managers, friends, just really read over it, because they're the ones that will catch those different things. Because I know when I reread my resume over and over again, or any emails, I go cross-eyed, and I probably are missing the same mistake that I did. So those are some of the ones that I really look for, and I think some of the other panelists would agree as well.
Yes, absolutely. And, you know, just in your experience, you know, how long does it take for you just to read a resume? Do you take no more than 2 minutes just to decide whether or not you should, you know, proceed with?
Yeah, I mean, with so many we're getting, especially,
you know, for like an interview, or is it something that takes a little bit of time to consider?
It depends on the position too.
So would you say,
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, I was going to say, would you consider that the resume be at minimum, or I mean at maximum, 1 page in length, or 2 pages?
Personal preference. I mean, I think this day and age, just to set yourself apart, I mean, 1 page may not be enough. I know there's that misconception, just get it onto 1 page, but that also goes into, like, when you're looking at your resume, people squeeze it, and like, I don't need to get my magnifying glass out to read it in a font of 6 to go in. So that's the thing. But I personal preference, I mean, like 2 pages probably max, but 1 page is, you know, pretty much ideal. But
of course. Well, thank you, Austin. Another follow-up question to that is, number one thing that should never be included on a resume. So what should never be included on a resume that you have seen in your past experience?
I think the biggest one is personal information, sometimes a little too detailed. Some people do list like hobbies. I mean, I love that, you know, you in your spare time you go fishing, but sometimes it might not be ideal to what we're doing here. You know, a lot of stuff too, like negative comments is a big one. You don't want to, like, obviously bash your former employers. You don't need to put your age on there. You know, just, and then sometimes, you know, the style fonts, they get a little, you know, eccentric, I guess is the best way to put it. Like just use something basic that's easy to read, not like, specialized like cursive or anything like that. It's going back to just making sure, that there's a lot of like just accomplishments and not just lists of job duties. Like you did this, 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 this. Other stuff too, high school education. If you graduate in college and it's on there, you probably can leave that out because I would assume that you graduated high school, or maybe just skipped right over and went straight to college, which would be amazing. And then the photo of yourself. I think I've seen a couple come through where the first page is an entire photo spread of themselves, and then we go into the resume. So, and I think the biggest outlier, is just, make sure you're not lying on your resume. That's another big one. I think we always forget about that because we do, especially in this town, there's a lot of people, we've all worked with each other and everything like that. We will do our homework. So that's another really, really big one for me.
Yes, and there's a lot of ways where and how we do homework because, let's say 20 years ago, we weren't able to go on Facebook or LinkedIn or any social media outlet to investigate, our potential applicants. Now we're conditioned to, look at other things and see how this employee could be a best representative of the organization.
Definitely.
Yes, well, thank you, Austin. So the next question is for Randy. Coming from a talent acquisition side, biggest mistake most candidates make on their resumes that you guys see?
So Austin had a great list. In fact, Austin, I think you took most of my items on my list that I was going to talk through, but I can add a little bit of color to a few of them. So, if you can imagine, right, the recruiters, the hiring managers are really trying to focus in on your background and your experience. One of the things we see sometimes is if there's a gap in that experience, that on a lot of resumes, there's no explanation of the gap, right? So we'll look at each role, we'll look at when you were in each role. When we see the gap, there definitely means there's a little question, like what happened during that time? And if you can explain it in the resume, that can definitely help. Like maybe you decided to travel for a year, maybe you were doing something to help with family issues. Somewhere explaining that, because otherwise people are going to start to question what was going on in that part of your career. If there is specific jargon, we're pretty infamous for that, I'd say, at MGM. We have different acronyms and jargon for just about everything you can think of. Try to leave the jargon out, right, and just speak in very clear terms around what you were doing. Right? We don't need to know all that specific jargon. I know a lot of times we will receive resumes in different types of formats, right? Sometimes it could be pages, or sometimes it's a Google Doc, sometimes it's a Word doc. And most of the time, obviously, we can figure that out and get it opened up. But if you're using an older version or something, sometimes when we pull it up, the formatting might look a little bit different. I always suggest just send your resume in a PDF format, right? Most applications allow you to save the PDF. And that way, right, what that recruiter, what that hiring manager is viewing is exactly how you actually formatted your resume. We already chatted about photos. Honestly, we don't need a photo at all, right? There's no need for a photo. Honestly, it makes like a lot of recruiters a little bit nervous, right? Because the last thing we want to do is be considering somebody based on kind of all of the different protected classes. So we don't need to see a photo. That doesn't need to use up space on your resume at all. One of the favorite things that I see on a lot of resumes as well is at the very bottom, people put references upon request. Yeah, we know that, right? If we need a reference, we're going to come out and reach out to you. You don't need to waste any space, right, in that area in that way. And then I think the last thing I'll say, and I realize this group probably would never make these different types of mistakes, but if you created an email address when you were younger that had some kind of interesting hobby or things you like to do, or you're trying to express yourself in terms of your email name, just create a new Gmail, right? Yahoo email that is very professional, because we don't need to know that sexy Mr. K is interested in this particular job, right? We just keep that really, really simple. So just a couple extra hints on top of what we already discussed.
All right, thank you. So now that we have discussed on mistakes of what not to include on a resume, what should be included in a resume? So this question is for Randy again. What does a screener look for when reviewing a resume? Just from like the initial process as someone like a recruiter or like an HR representative looking at the resume.
Yeah, so I mean, look, in all transparency, we are looking at these very quickly, right? I mean, on some of the roles, we might have hundreds of people applying on that exact same role. So we go straight into the experience section, right? That's exactly what we're looking at. So that's the part that you want to spend most of your time. And my suggestion would be, if you are truly really interested in a role, really look at the job description that's been posted by the company. Believe it or not, the company spent some time trying to figure that out, right? They're trying to share with you, here's what's required, here's what our preferences are, here's what we'd like to see in your background. And if you can tailor your resumes so that it helps match up those different pieces, that really is what the recruiter, the hiring manager are looking for, right? If we have a preference that someone has spent 2 years working at an integrated resort, let's make sure that you highlight that you spent at least that much time in an integrated resort. Again, we want to be very truthful, but sometimes you've had so many different experiences in your background, right? If you're using a generic resume, maybe you didn't highlight that particular item that is part of that actual job description. So again, if something you're really interested in, make sure you look closely at that job description. I would also say we don't need a very long resume. The shorter, the better. If you're newer in your career, it probably is a page. If you've been in your career longer, like we're looking at 5-10 years and you've had multiple roles, you can definitely go to 2 or 3 pages. Again, keep it clean. Don't try to cram all the information on one page. It's okay to go into that second or third page if you have that additional experience. And then I'd also say, when you're looking at experience, right, those experience sections, include the name of the company, obviously, include your tenure at that company, and try to highlight the things that I guess I know we look for from a recruiter's perspective. So highlight the different roles you had in the organization, right? Recruiters love to see any job progression, right? So if you work for MGM and you've had 4 different roles, right, in the last 8 years, that looks fantastic, right? Because we see, right, you've had all these different experiences and you continue to progress in your career. That tends to mean that you're successful, right, with what you've been doing in all these different roles. Let us know what your scope of work was, right? If you ever talk to a recruiter after they've seen your resume, one of the first things they're going to ask you is, who did you report into, right? Because we're trying to understand where you fit in the organization. What did your org look like? So if you were a leader or manager, did people report into you? What were their roles? You don't have to go into that much detail, but if you can give us some kind of an idea of your role and the scope of that role, that helps the recruiter quite a bit as well. And then I think the last thing I would say, if there's any significant achievements, like while you're in that role, if you were recognized as manager of the quarter, if you got some other type of recognition award, yeah, let us know about that. I mean, believe it or not, when a lot of recruiters are sourcing and looking for talent, we're searching for terms that show that there were some awards or recognition, right? It's funny because I'll tease some of the people at MGM, like, I don't always want to make public, right? We do this because we want people to be recognized. But we don't always want to make that public, because that's the first thing a recruiter is going to do is, here's someone that is outstanding at MGM that's been recognized as outstanding, or another company. That's one of the first people I'm going to go look for, right? Because I know they've been very successful in their role. So use that to your advantage and add those into your resume as well.
Yes, well, great tips. I just want to touch a little bit on the jargon. So let's say a job description. You read the job description, the candidate reads the job description, and you're trying to match it with what you have on your resume. But for some reason, the job description says you need to have familiarity with several of these software programs. Now, would it be okay to include some of these software programs if it's mentioned on the job description, to put it on the resume? Would that be acceptable? Yeah.
Yes, yeah, for sure. Like if there's a preference, if I'm hiring an HR person, maybe I want to say, hey, preference, you have prior Workday experience. If you have that Workday experience, I would definitely list that. I would also list if you've used other similar systems, right? So For the most part, yes, we'd love for someone to have that exact same experience. But if we know you've used similar types of systems, Oracle, right, other types of systems, list that also, because it shows us that you're familiar with the systems. And it's probably just a little bit of training we need to provide to kind of get you that extra level of specific Workday experience.
Thank you for that. And then last question, just on resumes. So I'm going to ask for each of three of you, Austin, Brittany, and Randy. So we'll begin with Austin. A format of an impressive modern day effective resume. What was your opinion on that?
The format?
Mm-hmm.
Not super specific. I just really, as long as like the timeline is proper, like obviously, like I think there's some stuff about objectives I do like, but also just as long as it's listed in the correct timeline. So I know like your most recent to your not even last job, just like the most one that's relevant to all your stuff. And also like on the bottom, really the accomplishments, like back to Randy's question or Randy's point is, just like if you had words and stuff like that. And also I do like the systems, especially like a lot of our stuff, just having familiarity with, you know, a property management system or whatever it may be is really useful for us when we're looking at them.
Thank you. How about you, Brittany?
I think the most important thing for me is just that you can navigate the resume very quickly and that it's very cleanly laid out. So, you know, again, to Austin and Randy's points earlier, it's important to say what you want to say and say it briefly. So without, you know, a lot of long stories. And then, you know, kind of counter to what Austin just said is the objective. I think that sometimes recruiters and operators can get lost in your objective. And if I already have your resume, then I likely already know what your objective is, and that's to get a job with me. And I can tell by your experience what you're passionate about. So I think that's kind of in today's day and age, it's just a waste of lines. So I wouldn't get so caught up in saying a really nice, pretty objective on the top of your resume. And just be clear about what experience you want to highlight. And then I'll know what your objective is.
Would you say so? It's more instead of like an objective, be more about like a little brief summary about yourself?
Sure. A summary is great, highlighting your experience, but make it more tailored to what your specific experience is, more so than why you're giving me your resume.
Absolutely. And Randy?
Yeah, so everyone is spot on this. I mean, honestly, I don't think I look at the objective or the summary at all, right? At all. And it's skipping straight down into the experience section. I think everyone covered all this pretty well. Keep it simple, right? Keep it easy to read. No fancy fonts like Arial, Veranda, like the very simple to read fonts. Don't make the fonts too small. Those of us that are wearing glasses. Just another little tip, right? I'm assuming a lot of people use Microsoft Word. There's some really good functionality and templates in there. You don't need to use the real fancy templates, like the real creative templates. In fact, I think simple is often better. But here's the good news, right? Every recruiter, and when you talk to, will have a little different view on this. And people like the fancy and the colorful resumes. I personally like to keep it relatively simple. If you're applying for a role that is kind of looking for creativity, if it's more of a creative role, then yeah, right, get a little bit more creative with your resume. But Word has some great templates. They also have some new functionality with LinkedIn that I'm sure people have seen before. If you start working on your resume in Microsoft Word, since Microsoft owns LinkedIn now, there's a lot of great tools that help you kind of craft your message, right? They'll give you some examples from other people in similar positions. So if you're kind of just getting stuck on the right words to use and how to best put that together, it's a great tool for that.
Yeah, I just want to add to that, if you're on the Microsoft Word application, I believe maybe the 2018 version and above, there is a feature, there's an editor feature where you can match your resume and you type in the job description and they'll give you some tools to tailor that resume based on that job description, that job title that you're applying for. All right, so now that we hit on the resumes, now Now we're going to focus on the application process, submitting that application with your resume through an organization's website. So this is a question for if anyone wants to chime in. How should a candidate respond when asked what pay range they are seeking or expecting?
I'll jump in first. I think it's important to understand what the existing pay range is for those types of jobs, so that you come in with a realistic number. It's also important, I think, to know a little bit about the climate of applicants and the experience that you bring as compared to them. So if you have very entry-level experience, or you're being promoted into that level of role, then it might be unrealistic to expect that you would get the top pay for that job level. However, if you're a little bit more senior in that space and have a lot of great experience, then it's more reasonable to expect a little bit more.
This is a follow-up question to that. Does obviously we live in the area of period of COVID-19, and I know we see on the news where positions that were offered at such a high salary range is now a little bit lower than expected. Would it be in the applicant's best interest to maybe go lower, just considering what's going on with today, or should they just aim for what is traditionally expected without the COVID?
I mean, I would really say do your research and understand the current environment, because that's not always the case. In all honesty, we really are hiring and we are paying compensation based on experience and time in a position that may be similar, or if it's a lateral, there might be something like that. But I think research is going to be key, and kind of reaching out to, especially if you're thinking about just in our little community here, everyone knows kind of what that pay range is going to be and kind of what the expectation is.
Yes, thank you for that. Right, so the next question is, are gaps in employment a concern even with a valid explanation? Well, first we have to define what is a valid explanation. Randy, could you touch on that? If we have, an applicant that is, let's say, 2 years, there's a 2-year gap. They didn't have any professional work experience. How do they, try to, stay above or, submit that put that on the resume?
Yeah, it is. I mean, this is definitely a little bit tricky, right? Because what you put on there can definitely influence the hiring manager or the recruiter in terms of moving you forward. Mm-hmm. But not putting anything on there, right? Just having a big gap sitting there. That's one of the first things we're going to look for. And even if everything looks really good on the resume, it's probably going to be one of the first questions you get, right? If we do reach out to you and say, okay, we have your resume, have a few questions for you, one of the first things is going to be, tell me about this last role you had and that gap, right, in between roles. So I've definitely seen some resumes where people fill that in, and they really do have some really good reasons around that gap. Maybe you were starting to do something on your own, right? Whatever it is, again, maybe you're taking care of a family member. It does help, right? It might seem like it's sticking out a little bit on the resume, but allows the recruiter to say, okay, this person is definitely calling this out, letting us know they were spending this time, and likely have a better chance of receiving the call from us versus just leaving the gap in there.
Good, great. Yes, and also on the application process, how important are keywords for online applications?
That is a great question. So a lot of this will depend on the employer, right? Systems that they're leveraging and utilizing. I can share with us, right, from an MGM perspective, when you apply and the hiring manager gets your application, your resume, there's nothing that is being filtered in terms of what you put in your resume, right? The system's not looking for any keywords, it's not filtering it in any way. Really, if there's anything that's being filtered, it's just based on the questions you're answering for us around those minimum qualifications for the role, right? So you don't meet the minimums, there's a good chance it's not going to go forward, right? And it obviously, right, you shouldn't be applying to something where you don't meet the minimums for the role. Now, while I say all that, there are a lot of employers, and we actually have a version of this system, but that only our recruiting team has access to, that will try to prioritize candidates, right, in a queue. Again, imagine hundreds of candidates on one specific job. The system, right, and the AI will try to prioritize candidates based on your job titles and based on some of the keywords, right? So again, if I'm looking for someone with Workday experience, if you have Workday on your resume, the system might pull that out and score you a little bit higher because it could see those two things where we're actually matching up. I think the trick for all employers is these things are far from perfect, right? We don't make decisions based on that scoring, but it can help the recruiter just look at a group and say, I'm going to start reviewing the people that seem to be scoring the highest. So that goes back to what I was talking about in terms of look at the job description. If you see words in there, right, that are specific and you have that experience, include that on your resume, and that will make sure those keywords are there and connected. If someone's using a system like that, it helps throw your resume up towards the top of the score in that particular system.
Yes, absolutely. I think a lot of us, who are applying for positions, they're always wanting to see what is the big question of how to beat that online application system, how to put yourself ahead as a pilot.
Yeah, I just gave you the secret sauce, right? Because the system's looking at the job description, it's looking at the keywords, and it's looking at your resume. The closer those two match, the higher you're going to score.
Yes, excellent. Now that we touch on resumes and applications, we're now going to go on interviews. All right. So now that you've been selected and for a potential interview, this question is for Brittany. Best practices when interviewing virtually.
Sure. Thank you, Anthony. The first and most important, I think, is to test your equipment. So in the day and age of COVID and doing virtual interviews, I think that we've realized a lot of efficiency by doing virtual interviews. Although in-person interviews are starting to come back somewhat for some key roles in different organizations. But we saw it many times throughout the last year and a half or so, where we had interviews where the candidate didn't test their equipment. So it's important to make sure that you have good Wi-Fi signal, that your camera works, that your audio obviously works. We need to hear what you're saying clearly. And it becomes frustrating for the candidate too, once they're having technical difficulties as they're going through the interview. And then make sure that you have a really great professional business-like space to do the interview. So we've seen sometimes candidates trying to do an interview from their car, out and about while they're running errands. And once the recruiter or the scheduler calls you to schedule the interview, if you truly aren't going to be available at that time, just let us know. Oftentimes we have several times available to do the interview, and we'd rather you be prepared and focused. So it's really important to have a good business-like environment where you can concentrate. I think it is still important that you dress the part. So, I think the saying is dress in the role that you want to be in. So whatever that looks like for the position that you're applying for, make sure that you are still dressed appropriately for even a virtual interview. I read one time that even when you dress well, you perform better. So, if you're wearing your pajama bottoms, you'll probably perform like you're wearing your pajama bottoms. Mm-hmm. So, one thing that's also important is making sure that your enthusiasm for the role is not lost virtually. So if it is something that you really care about, let the panel or the interviewer see your personality come through, because a lot of times, of course, we're looking for a great fit in terms of experience, but we're looking for a great fit in terms of culture as well. So it's important to make personal connections and let your personality come through. And then still, just like any other interview, always follow up within 24 hours of the interview with the people who interviewed you.
Yeah, really great tips. And I have to say that, because we're in a virtual environment, and there's a lot of distractions involved, the last thing you want the employer to know is they're focused on the distraction
Yeah, and don't be afraid
and not what you're saying through the content of the interview.
Don't be afraid to do a test call before your interview with a friend or a mentor to make sure that your lighting is right, your sound is right, that the connection works. And it'll make you feel better and more relaxed for the interview as well.
Absolutely. And also another tip was, because we're in a virtual environment, a lot of us might have like a script that's on like the computer screen. Just make sure to always look at the camera a few times. I'm guilty of it myself. I'm probably even doing this right now where I'm looking at the script and not looking at the interview, at the employer. So just always, just check yourself and, test and, look directly at the camera so that you're looking at the person that you're having a vested interest in that position.
Yes.
Do not read a script in a video interview. Do not do that. We'll see that immediately that you're reading off something, and that is just be you.
Yes.
Relax, answer the questions, right? You don't need to be that formal.
Right. So let's look at some of the common interview questions. One common interview question is, where do you see yourself in 5 years? How do we best answer that? This question is for Brittany.
Thank you. So I think that's a challenging question, and you're right, it is kind of a common one that we see. So you want, with any question, to be as specific and experience based as possible. And 5 years, especially in these days, is a very, very long time. So think more about the short-term goals that you can make along the way in those 5 years. So maybe break it down into, and every 6 months, what would you want to accomplish in that role? And tailor your description of your experience to how you will get there. So, if it's making sure you have a robust onboarding process and building relationships, goals that you'd like to accomplish within that team, whatever kind of all of those smaller milestones look like along the way to the 5 years is how I would recommend answering that question, because it is a little bit far-fetched, especially in this world. And then, how will this specific job that you are applying for help get you there is what I would also focus on.
Of course. And I think that's also stated, like, let's say another question that's always commonly asked is when we ask the applicant and we introduce each other, is tell me a little bit about yourself, right?
Exactly.
You want to tell a little bit about yourself tailored to the position that you're applying for. We don't need to hear your whole story. This is your chance to do that elevator pitch.
Exactly. We don't want to hear that you like fishing or baking.
Yeah.
We, love that you have kids and animals and all of those wonderful things.
Mm-hmm.
But we want to hear specifically about your experience.
Absolutely. I think we can all say that, throughout these questions is don't mention a lot about your hobbies, unless those hobbies are related to the position that you're applying for. All
exactly.
Right. And then,
unless your hobby is volunteering for the NHLA.
Yeah, absolutely.
Exactly.
And then last question on the interview. This is more for in-person interviews. Common mistake candidate makes when it's interviewing in person. Austin, that question is for you.
Yeah, I mean, similar, like, dress for success. I mean, I've had people show up in t-shirts and like a fleece vest. I mean, it might be cold outside a little bit, but I mean, we're a business professional for anything you interview with. I think that's just a theme, really do your research. I think that's just all the way around, like understand who you're interviewing with, who, the culture, the position, and, even though it's MGM Resorts, also do research on the property that you're actually going to be interviewing with. Make sure you know your resume too, like what you have on there. Just kind of going back to that, like, you might use it as a reference or like that, but like, a lot of interviews will use specifics and ask you about different positions. Don't talk too much is another big one, like just rambling on about a whole story that sometimes turns into talking about hobbies and personal life, and it just goes on and on. Going back to what I said about resumes too, don't really bash your prior employer or speak poorly upon any previous jobs. I hear that one a lot. It's not a good one. Another one too is like, when you arrive, don't arrive too early. If you're here 45 minutes before your interview, I mean, that's great that you have a lot of extra time on your hands, But make sure it's appropriate, and obviously don't be late. That's another big one. And also another big one is really like, have questions to ask. I think that one I a lot of times, I don't want to say it bothers me, but like, when do you have any questions? They're like, nope. And it's just interview's over. You're like, where do we go on from there? And then also just body language too, is another one. Don't lean back in the chair, really, reflect like, what your interviewer is doing. Don't be super casual, which I've definitely experienced that as well. Those are a lot of the big ones that I really see.
Yeah, we want the candidate to be interested in the position, and just not having a question or a follow-up question after the interview is done. It just shows that you're lacking of interest and you don't care for the position.
Will say, if I can just add one thing too, speaking of like follow-up questions, is one that we hear very often lately is, what is your timeline to fill the role? And I always laugh a little bit when I hear that question, because if we're interviewing for it, our timeline is very fast. We obviously, any hiring manager's intention is to fill the role as quickly as possible. So make your questions tailored to about, the expectations of the job, the company culture, not so much about how fast we're looking to fill the position, because it's always immediately.
Absolutely. And I guess, just to answer that back to you, Brittany, how would a candidate respond to that? Or maybe is there another way they can say a follow-up question just related to that? Would they say like, I look forward to hearing from you soon. Here is my contact information. You have my resume. Is that something that?
Sure. And the candidate is going to do that as well when they follow up with you after the interview within 24 hours. So again, that's a great opportunity to make sure that we have the right contact information, that you're at top of our mind, to thank us for the interview one final time. And of course, if you are the one selected for the position, we will be in touch with you very quickly.
Of course.
And typically we would go over like next steps when we're finalizing the interview. So that should answer most likely that question.
All right. Sure. And then go ahead, Randy.
I was just going to add, if you think about it, like number one, you as a candidate need to clarify any questions you really do have about the job, right? If there's any questions, there really is no bad question, right? You need to understand what that job is. But from the hiring manager's recruiter's perspective, we're looking for questions that show us that you are genuinely interested in this role. Like, you are excited about it. You want to understand it better. And if you can frame up questions in that way, right, it's going to leave that hiring manager with the feeling like, wow, they really looked into us. They understand the company. They seem to really be excited about the job. That's how you want to leave them with the questions.
Of course. And this question is for Randy. I know this wasn't one of the pre-selected ones, but interview questions. Do we see a shift right now that almost interview questions are now behavioral-based questions, where the candidate has to answer or basically tell a story, where there's a situation followed by a task, an action, and then a result?
Yeah, I think most companies, and we do this as well, most companies are asking behavioral-based questions or situational type questions, right? What would you do in this type of circumstance? So that is more of that type of situational question is more asking you to think about something and how you might respond. Behavioral question being, tell me about a time when you were in this type of circumstance and how did you handle it? And as you can see, right, the purpose of these questions are trying to really understand your experience, right, your job-related background and experience, and how you end up approaching things. And I think most employers, it's these types of questions that you're going to get. So that really is going to be most of what the interview questions format is.
Of course. And I guess overall interview questions, when a candidate is being interviewed, I think the worst thing is to say yes, no, those one-worded answers. You have to tell a little bit about yourself and really emphasize your accomplishments and your experience to bring to that position.
I think one thing that's important to note too, though, is that you should be mindful of the interviewer's time. So typically, anyone who's doing an interview hasn't scheduled more than an hour to dedicate to the interview. So when you're telling your story and your examples, be mindful that they probably have about 5 or 6 questions for you. So if any answer is, longer than 10 or 15 minutes, be mindful that, then they might think you aren't aware of time.
Yes, absolutely. Well, again, we thank you, panel. These is almost all of our pre-selected questions from the NHLA members. Now we're going to redirect to the Q&A feature. So if anybody in the audience does have a question for the panelists, type it in on the Q&A feature. We actually have a few questions from the audience. So question from Sean. How do you cater your resume to specific departments? For example, a finance position or an HR position? Would like to answer that.
I can start it.
I'll take it. I've had experience in kind of 2 different spaces within the company. So, hotel operations and guest experience. And while there are a lot of similarities, there are a lot of differences. So, if I am applying for a guest experience role, I'm really going to focus on strategic initiatives, guest service centered initiatives. If I'm focused on hotel operations, it's going to be about, how many FTEs I managed, how I led larger initiatives, and made sure that they were successful throughout my organization. So, if I was applying for a role in finance, I would want to talk about specific experience that I've had partnering with the finance team.
Thank you for that. Okay. Next question. Some of the biggest challenges hotel or talent acquisition is facing post-COVID. What are the challenges?
There's none. We don't have any challenges. We have no challenges going on right now. Yeah, look, we went from, as everybody on the call understands, right? We went from a circumstance where really, right, properties were closed, minimal staffing, a lot of employees were furloughed, a very difficult time. I know this has been said over and over again, to what I don't think any of us ever imagined, right? I think as we moved into February and vaccines were starting to come out, we thought, okay, there'd probably be a slow ramp up of services, right? Government restrictions would slowly be pulled back. But I don't think anyone imagined the pent up kind of demand that was out there, right? Maybe we should have, because I think we were all tired of being, cooped up in our homes. That ramp up happened unbelievably quickly, right? Crazy quickly. I think all the companies had a lot of employees that, for many different reasons, right? Maybe decided not to return to work, maybe, right? Because it was a long time, started another career path. So between not having all employees come back, right? Having the quick ramp up and quick need to, find talent quickly. It's a big challenge, right? You read anything going on right around employment across the nation. This is not just a Las Vegas thing. This is a challenge, across the country. So everyone is looking for good people. That's the reality, right? Everyone on this call, I think would agree, right? Their first priority right now is bringing talent in, good talent, as quickly as we can possibly make that happen. That is the focus, right? That's the only way we take care of our guests, which is always the end goal for everything. We've got to have great talent. And I'll just throw in a plug, right? For those of you not working for MGM, feel free to connect with me or any other people on this call. We'll do everything we can to make sure you don't get lost in the volume of candidates that we deal with, and we get you connected. We want to, I am sure this is a very great group of people on this call, and there's probably some place for you at MGM. So we'd love to have people on the call. But it's a challenging time for everybody right now.
Of course, absolutely. Question on the chat feature. This is questions coming from Michael. What is a great way to showcase your work ethic in the interview? As someone like myself, newer in my field, I work really hard. Sometimes I have trouble getting that point across. What would be some tips to help better express that?
think some of that's going to go along of showcasing accomplishments. Like if you work really hard, your manager and or company that you worked for should have rewarded you with something, employee of the month, just, top exceptional mentions, whatever it may be. That's where it's really going to set yourself apart. I mean, because everyone's going to say in their interview, I work so hard, I work 20 hours a day, I don't take any days off. Like, that just shows you're going to burn yourself out. But you really want to showcase like yourself, like really what you've accomplished at several of your roles, and that'll really set you apart.
You can even mention your willingness to always work overtime when your managers need it. You can mention if you were selected to be a new hire trainer. So we only allow new hires to be with, our best of the best within our department. So if you're one of those people who always has someone shadowing you, it's because you're doing a great job. So, I think people forget that things like that are definitely accomplishments within their job.
Yeah, like you're a go-to to your manager all the time, or you're even within our departments here, we have a lot of auxiliary positions. Like you were selected amongst 70 people, and you're the number one right now, like head cashier, for instance. So a lot of that stuff will set yourself apart.
I want to say, when you're demonstrating your accomplishments, is it best to, let's say, quantify your accomplishments, really, or qualify them, or not qualify, or make it as qualitative and quantitative, rather than just saying, well, I've been awarded this award. Tell me a little bit more about this accomplishment that you received, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All right, so we'll do one last question. Coming from Sean, how important are degrees and certifications in today and tomorrow's environment? MBAs, PMPs, CPAs, and etc. Who wants to comment on that? So I guess education, how does education play a role?
Yeah, so I'll
job.
Oh, go ahead, Brittany.
One thing that I'll say about degrees is that I do think that they are great and important. I myself have one in my direct field that I work in. So I do think that it's important if that's the field that you work in. But I don't want to discount relevant work experience either, because a degree is amazing and it shows that you put in a lot of hard work. But without the relevant work experience, it won't set you apart from the rest of the candidates. So I think a combination of both is incredibly important in today's world.
Yeah, I think Brittany answered that perfectly, right? That is so on the spot, right? When we're doing college recruiting, right? The people that have been in college that were working in the industry, right? While they're getting the degree, that they rise to the top, right? The people that were just studying, and maybe you were a fantastic student, probably don't have as good of a chance. If you're looking for roles that you haven't had as much exposure to, though additional certifications can help, right? Because at least it's showing us that, I'll use human resources, for example. If you've never been in HR, you have some operations experience, you want to get into human resources. If you took a certification class at UNLV around human resources, at least that's going to show us you're making every attempt. You've done some additional education around this, and that might help you, right, take that first step into a different functional area.
Don't be afraid too, like within your organizations, to raise your hand and say that you want experience in a certain space. So, if Austin was looking to join the HR team in the future, he could definitely raise his hand and lean into HR specific projects to start getting some of that experience. So, most often your organizations are really happy to rally behind whatever your next career step is.
I would also add, like, take advantage of those mentor programs. I think a lot of people do not, especially like NHLA has one, UNLV has one. There's a couple more that we have just within the company, and that's how you'll set yourself apart. And that's how you'll get that, honestly, that you'll start networking. That's huge. I can't stress that enough.
I think, I want to say, really for any applicants that's looking for a position that they're really interested and invested for, is to really network yourself out there. It does not just take a resume, an interview, and a really, filling out the keywords to beat the application system, you really need to get yourself out there and connect with these top leaders. And of course, NHLA does have a mentorship program. They have the Women in Lodging mentorship, and then we also have the Emerging Leaders mentorship program. I know coming up this fall, to any of the NHLA members watching this, definitely volunteer. Either you want to be a mentor or a mentee. This is a great way for you to connect with people in the organizations. All right, and I guess that pretty much wraps up our webinar. Once again, we want to thank Austin Raymond, Brittany Maraca, Randy Goldberg for really giving us some insight tips on impressive resumes, assertive applications, and successful interviews. We do have, with the continuation of the MGM panel series, the next one coming up is on June 17th. So go to nvhotels.com, click on the event tab, and you'll see a calendar of events. You'll go from there and register from each of those webinar sessions. Again, my name is Anthony Lai. Thank you for joining us. If any of our audience members have missed a portion of this webinar, this will be uploaded on the NHLA YouTube channel, and follow us on our social media channels at nvhotels.com. Thank you again, and have a great afternoon.
Anthony, great job.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Oh, I think we need to do a little plug. Where can people apply for MGM Resorts?
Oh, yeah.
So you won't be surprised. Careers.mgmresorts.com, or just go to our main career site. You'll see careers towards the bottom. But again, feel free to reach out to any of us also directly, so we can help expedite your application.
Yes, so please go on the chat feature, click on the link, careers.mgmresorts.com. They are hiring now. Bye all.